All right, Dinosaur Boy Chapter 9 Layups Standing Up. At first, I wondered how Alan and Cece had avoided being caught up in what came to be known as the Great Purge. But the answer soon became clear. At lunchtime, immediately following that epic morning in the science lab, Elliot pulled 6 rings off my plates 3 red and 3 yellow. On the scorecard Sylvia had stolen, those were Alan's and Cece's colors. They had gotten so good at the game, they hadn't had any rings left to bust them. After the Great Purge, nobody ever played the ring toss game again, but that didn't mean everyone left me in peace. The next day, Jeremy Harris tripped me on the way to the computer lab, and during lunch, I discovered that someone had written Dino Dork with a purple felt tip marker on all of my tennis balls. That afternoon, when Principal Mathis arrived to take Jeremy away, she also searched Emma's desk. I was shocked when she discovered the purple marker. Vivian was my best friend, Emma hissed at me as she gathered up her Hello Kitty backpack. I watched sadly as Emma's pink Converse disappeared out the door, right behind Jeremy and Principal Mathis. I hadn't known Jeremy at all. Actually, I had always assumed he was kind of strange because he wore overalls all the time, but I had thought Emma was one of the nice ones. As I gazed after Emma, I caught Alan glaring at me, as though this was all my fault. He sat 2 rows behind me and slightly to the left. I didn't like that he sat behind me. It made it far too easy for him to watch me. Whereas if I wanted to look at him, I had to go through the uncomfortable, slow process of twisting around and smashing all my plates against the back of the chair. I had a feeling Alan was planning his next move, but I didn't get to find out what it was until gym a few days after the Great Purge. Our basketball unit had started early this year. Elliot was, of course, thrilled, but I was miserable. If you ever tried dribbling a basketball with a long tail dragging behind you, you'll understand why. That day we were supposed to be learning layups. Coach Carpenter demonstrated the concept, which, it was obvious to me, I would never come close to achieving, and split us into groups beneath the gym's 4 basketball hoops to practice. I waited glumly for my turn to come. When I was almost at the front of the line, I saw Cece attempt a layup on the next hoop over. She tripped, fell on her face, and lay sprawled out on the gym floor moaning. Even from a distance, it looked fake, so I wasn't exactly surprised when, as soon as Coach Carpenter ran to her aid, Alan appeared in front of me. He stood with his back to Cece and the coach and used his enormous head to cut me off from everyone else in the gym. Time for a chat, butt brain, Alan said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out half of a bologna sandwich. He must have been doing it just to bug me. I mean, who else brings a sandwich to gym? I tried not to make a face as he raised it to his lips and bit off most of it in just one bite. Alan watched me carefully as he chewed. He did it with his mouth open, and I could see shreds of bologna dangling from his teeth. The smell of meat was nauseating. The whole thing made my stomach lurch. I didn't say anything because I didn't trust myself not to hurl, but I didn't let myself look away until he finished the sandwich with a second, smaller bite and stuffed the empty baggie back into his shorts pocket. "What happened to Parker?" he asked me as he wiped his mouth, "and the other kids who got kicked out." "What do you mean?" I asked. I tried to sound casual, even though my mind was working overtime, trying to figure out what he was getting at. "You heard me," he said, crossing his arms. "Where is Parker?" How should I know? He got kicked out of school. I haven't seen him since that day in the computer lab." "Neither have I," Alan said icily. "Neither has anyone. His phone's been shut off and he's not at his house, and Cece says the same with Nora and Vivian and all of the other kids, too." I frowned. It had never really occurred to me to wonder about Parker or any of the other kids Principal Mathis had thrown out of school. I just assumed they'd had to enroll in the other public school across town. Frankly, I'd just been glad they were no longer around to torture me. "It's not my problem," I told Alan. "It is now," he informed me. Alan, swiveling his big head, and glanced over his shoulder to where Coach Carpenter was still bent over a prostrate Cece. The rest of our class was standing around, bored, waiting for the signal to return to layup practice. Elliot and Sylvie were among them, both watching me with worried eyes. "Parker was my friend," Alan said, turning his head back to me. He took a step forward so that he was right in front of my face. "What did you do to him?" I could smell the remnants of his sandwich on his breath, but I didn't become nauseated this time. Instead, I felt my entire body tense. My tail gave a warning twitch. Suddenly, I had a powerful urge to whirl around and whack Alan right in the face with the ends of my spikes. There were only 2 problems with this. One, the tennis balls would have made my tail just bounce off his cheekbones instead of ripping his face to shreds. 2, that definitely would have been a violation of the school's code of conduct, not to mention my promise to Principal Mathis. So instead, I looked Alan right in the eye. He was wearing his normal annoyed expression. His thick eyebrows were knitted together in the very center of his ugly face. There was anger in his eyes as usual, but there was something questioning there, too. He really does want to know where Parker is. He thinks I know something. I decided to use that to my advantage. I leaned even closer to Alan so that our faces were practically touching. Parker messed with me, I told him, in what I hoped was a menacing tone. Don't make the same mistake. Alan's eyes narrowed. I did not back down, although a large portion of my brain had already started to rethink the tough guy strategy. Luckily, Coach Carpenter came to my rescue. Sort of. Back to business, everyone, his voice boomed, and for heaven's sake, pay attention to where you put your feet. I don't have time to fill out any more accident reports today, okay? Alan and I continued to stand there, eyes locked, until Alan finally blinked. This isn't over, he informed me. Probably not, I agreed. Alan turned and went to the back of the nearest layup line. I stayed where I was until my shaking subsided enough for me to be able to walk to a line on the other side of the gym from Alan's. I had done it. I had stood up for myself. Sylvie was right. It felt good. I didn't feel like I had been stomped on and gotten the wind knocked out of me, which is how I normally felt after an encounter with Alan. Instead, I felt full of energy, like I might actually be able to do a layup without being weighed down by my plates and without tripping on my tail. But I still couldn't help being the tiniest bit curious about what had really happened to Parker and all the rest of the ring toss kids who had been kicked out. Later that day, after proving to everyone in gym class that my newfound confidence in my layup abilities was entirely in my head, I told Elliot and Sylvie what Alan had told me about Parker and the other kids who had been expelled. So they're just gone? Elliot asked. I shrugged. I guess so. I don't know why Alan would lie about it. Oh, intrigue. Sylvie pulled her hood back a fraction of an inch. Her eyes were sparkling with excitement. It's not like they could all just disappear, Elliot said. That's crazy. We would have heard something about it. We could check their houses, Sylvie suggested. It shouldn't be too hard to figure out where they all live. It must be nearby, right? I nodded. Parker lives 2 streets away from me. Sylvie smiled and rubbed her hands together. I guess we know what we're doing after school today. No way, Elliot shook his head. It's not like we're friends with Parker. We can't just show up at his house. We can if he doesn't know that we're there, Sylvie said, winking in Elliot's direction. Elliot shook his head. This is a bad idea, he said, to no one in particular. Bad idea or not, Sylvie could not be talked out of it. As soon as school was out for the day, the 3 of us walked to Parker's house. We did our best to be stealthy, but let's face it, it's kind of hard to sneak up on someone when your group is made up of a part dinosaur, a really tall kid, and a girl in a bright orange sweatshirt. We're like the worst spies ever, Elliot complained, picking the thoughts right out of my brain. Shh, Sylvie put a finger to her lips and ducked behind an oversized plant. She nodded to the house I had directed us to. You're sure that's it? She whispered. I nodded. I walked by Parker's house almost every day, but I had only actually been inside of it once, for a birthday party 2 years ago, when Parker's parents had forced him to invite everybody in the class, including me and Elliot. I remembered the red and blue stained glass parrot on their front door. Parker's parents were really into bird watching or something. I could see the bird through the branches of the plant we were hiding behind. Sylvie motioned for Elliot and me to stay put. Then she crawled on her hands and knees to peek her head around the side of the foliage. It's like the plants. Elliot shifted his long legs uncomfortably on the ground beside me. It wasn't actually raining, which was kind of miraculous since it was an afternoon in Portland, but the ground was still wet and slightly muddy from that morning's rain. We were all going to have wet butts after this. Mom was probably going to make me hose off my tail before she allowed me in the house. Sylvie crawled back around to us. There's a light in the front hall, she reported. That means someone must be home. See? Alan doesn't know what he's talking about, Elliot scoffed. Can we go now? We haven't seen Parker yet, Sylvie reminded me. Which room is his? Elliot looked over at me, and we both shrugged. Sylvie gave us an exasperated look. We've only been here once, I reminded her, and the party was mostly in the backyard. Fine, Sylvie said, and thought for a moment. We'll have to sneak around the side of the house then and look in some windows. It shouldn't take us too long to find his room. To me, that sounded like an excellent way to get caught. Why was Sylvie so determined to see Parker? Perhaps she felt some sort of kinship with the kid whose desk she now sat in. I looked over at Elliot. From his face, I could tell he felt the same way. But since neither of us had the energy to argue with Sylvie, we got up off the muddy ground and followed her around the bush. We were halfway up Parker's driveway when the garage door started to go up. Sylvie motioned us frantically back to the bush. She and Elliot both scrambled back down the driveway and dove to safety. I got as far as the edge of the driveway before something suddenly jerked me backward. I looked behind me. One of my tail spikes had lost its tennis ball and was now stuck in a flower bed. I reached back and tried to jerk my tail free, but the spike was buried too deep in the mud and wouldn't budge. The garage door was now a quarter of the way up, and I thought I could hear somebody talking. I turned around and tried to reach the end of my tail so that I could dig it free, but my tail did not want to bend that way. I heard a pop, and I bit my lip to keep from yelling as I felt a sharp stab of pain just above my spikes. A small flash of orange beside me, and pulled my spike free. The yank sent another stab of pain racing up my tail, but I ignored it and followed Sylvie back to the safety of the bush. I cradled my aching tail in my hands, oh poor guy, as we peered through the leaves to see if we had been caught. A tall woman wearing shorts and tennis shoes walked out of the open garage. She was carrying a large garbage bag in one hand and holding a cell phone to her ear with the other. "It's been difficult, of course," she was saying as she walked to the end of the driveway. "We miss him terribly, but we're managing." Sylvie looked at me questioningly. I mouthed, "Parker's mom." The three of us crouched down even farther and did our best to be invisible, but Mrs. Douglas appeared oblivious to our presence, even when she paused at the end of the driveway, less than an arm's length away from us on the other side of the plant. "I finally got started on his room today," she said into the phone. "You wouldn't believe the clutter. It's going to take me days to clean it out." She swung the garbage bag onto the curb and turned, walking back into the garage. The three of us sat in silence as the garage door shuttered and slowly rolled back down. Elliot and I stared at each other. Sylvie reached around the bush and dragged the garbage bag into her lap. "She was talking about Parker, wasn't she?" Elliot said finally. Instead of responding, Sylvie started picking at the knot on the top of the bag. "I think so," I replied, the pain in my tail momentarily forgotten as I struggled to make sense of Mrs. Douglas' words. "It's been difficult. We miss him." Those aren't the sort of things you say about someone who has been safely enrolled in the school across town. Those are the kind of things you say when somebody has... No, I told myself, don't even think it. "He can't be dead," Elliot whispered, stealing my thoughts again. "What could have happened?" Sylvie gave up the knots and ripped a hole in the side of the garbage bag, spilling the contents onto the muddy ground in front of her. Clothes. A wadded-up assortment of shirts, jeans, and track pants fell out of the bag. I spotted a familiar shade of red and pulled it out of the pile. I shuddered as I recognized the sneering face of the angry bird. The last time I'd seen that shirt, Parker had been wearing it, and leading half of our computer class in the butt brain chorus. We reached over and dug through the rest of the clothes, looking for holes, stains, rips, anything that would explain why Mrs. Douglas would throw them away. But there was nothing. The clothes were all perfectly ready to be worn. There was no reason to throw them away, unless, of course, there was no longer someone to wear them. We'll see. We'll find out what happens with Parker next time.